Hello and welcome to the Drexel interview. I'm your host, Paula Marantz-Cohen, speaking to you from the Drexel University Picture Gallery. Today our guest is Dr. Karen Armstrong, the award-winning author of numerous books on comparative religion. Dr. Armstrong has taken a leading role in efforts to bring the various religious groups in the world to a better understanding of each other, and has been rewarded for her interfaith efforts with the 2008 TED Prize. Her most recent book is The Case for God. Karen Armstrong, welcome to the Drexel interview.
Thank you.
Well, I want to start with your background and your growing up. You grew up in England, as we can tell from your accent, in an Irish Catholic family, or that was your background, was Irish, and you went into a convent in your teens. You became a nun.
Yes.
And I wonder how your family influenced that choice and how they reacted to that choice.
My family didn't influence it. They were absolutely appalled. We weren't a pious family at all. We went to Mass in the morning, but my parents used to like to go as early as possible to get it over and done with. Oh. They were appalled when I decided to, and as well they might have been, because I was far too young to make that kind of decision. I was only 17 years old.
Wow.
So it was, in a sense, for me, a kind of rebellion against teenage rebellion against family, against what I saw as the very commercialized and materialistic environment of Birmingham in which I was living.
But what a strange way to rebel. I mean, or at least very unconventional.
Yes. And of course, there was also a kind of worry about the position of women. All the women I saw in the 1950s seemed endlessly to be running around looking after men and cleaning and cooking and scrubbing, and the nuns seemed unencumbered by all this. They were independent women. They ran their own show. But of course the irony is that when I went into the convent, all I did for the first few years was cook and clean and scrub.
For other nuns.
Yes.
Well, you were in the convent, you were in the Society of the Holy Child Jesus from 1962 to 1969. That's quite a long time,
yes.
7 years. And you've written about the difference between belief and faith.
Yes.
And I wonder if that was something that was at issue while you were in the convent. You were a believer, you say, in one of your books, but you didn't have faith.
Yes.
Could you explain?
I didn't know this distinction at the time, but there is a big distinction between belief, as we understand that word today, and faith. The English word belief, beleven as it was in Middle English, meant to love. It was related to the German Liebe or the Latin libido. It did not mean accepting a set of doctrines. And it translated the Greek pistis, which is our word for faith, which meant commitment, engagement, trust, and also the Latin credo, cordo, comes from cordo, I give my heart. So belief was an involvement. And one of the things I'm pointing out in this book is that the modern tendency first to believe a set of doctrines, to decide whether you believe in them or not, before you live a religious life, is really turning everything upside down. Because in all the major world religions, including Christianity, first you live a religious life, and then you start to have intimations of what we call God, or nirvana, or Brahman. But you're not going to get it unless you're doing it, unless you're committed, engaged, involved. Because religion is a kind of practical discipline. It's like driving or swimming or dancing or gymnastics. A dancer has to spend years practicing before she attains competence or excellence. But when she does attain this skill, she can do things that seem absolutely extraordinary to those of us who are untrained.
So when you were in the convent, you were practicing, though, weren't you? But you didn't understand. You felt you should have then had faith, and you didn't quite. You weren't there yet.
I thought that belief, and I had no problem with believing things at that stage, though I have to say that I was so bad at prayer.
What does that mean to be bad at prayer?
Well, when you go into your meditation, make your morning meditation for an hour each morning, I found I could not keep my mind on my meditation for more than 2 minutes. Huh. My brain instantly went skittering off down a myriad of distractions. This was obviously a drawback for a nun.
Yeah.
And so it was the wrong kind of prayer for me, I think. It was the kind of meditation I was doing really wasn't suitable for me, because prayer is not something that you can prescribe. You know, the same for everybody. Everybody has to find their own form of spirituality. But also the kind of practices that we were engaged in the convent were not conducive to a good religious experience.
But you were there for 7 years.
Yes.
Why did it take you so long to come to well, you went in at 17, so you were very young. In your book, Through the Narrow Gate, you do deal with the process, or what it is that you struggled with.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you came to a realization that you needed to leave?
Well, I didn't want to leave. You know, there was no question of my racing out and thinking, wow, now I can live a wonderful life and earn money and have lovers and travel and wear lovely clothes.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to be terrible to leave the convent, and it was terrible. But gradually, there was the prayer thing, the fact that I could not pray. So a nun is worth nothing if she has no strong prayer life. And my prayer life was so bad, it seemed to me that it was off the charts. But then I found it wasn't really a very compassionate environment. It was, people who've done military service say it reminded them of boot camp, where the idea was to make us tough and strong, just as your training sergeant in the army is going to make you a fighting man, tough. And so so there was that. But after a while, it all seemed so unkind to me in a way.
And you see compassion. You've written that you feel compassion is at the root of real spirituality.
Yes, indeed, and that I discovered later. But even then, I had an intimation that this was nothing like the Gospels.
Okay.
You know, but it's true. Every single one of the major world traditions insists that compassion, that means the ability to feel with the other, to put yourself in the position of the other, is at the root of religion. That it is the test of all religiosity, all spirituality, and it is compassion, not believing a whole lot of doctrines, which is neither here nor there in most traditions, but compassion, the endless determination to look into your own heart, discover what gives you pain, and then refuse under any circumstance whatsoever ever to inflict that pain on anybody else. That is the root of spirituality. It's that endless dethroning of yourself from the center of your world and putting another there that brings us to what we call God, Nirvana, Brahman, or Tao.
Oh, well, that's eloquently expressed. After you left the convent, you went on to Oxford, where you took a degree in English literature. So did you see a continuity between your religious life and then your life in literature? Because I assume you had to immerse yourself in books,
yes,
secular books.
I didn't at the time see that continuity. Now I see it very much a continuity. And indeed, the study of literature is an excellent training ground for theology. Because religion, like all religion, good, skillful religion, like literature, takes fiction and symbolism and myth very, very seriously. It understands, good poetry understands the limits of what words can do. A good poem brings you to the point where you realize you're at the end of what speech can say. And that's what good theology should do too. So it was, in fact, a splendid translation, preparation for what I'm doing now. Though, at the time, immersing myself in English literature seemed a wonderful release and escape from all that religious stuff, which I then discarded after I left the convent.
Well, I guess the difference was that you saw that as dogma, and now you were dealing with something that was more fluid or creative.
And indeed, a lot of theology is very dogmatic and attempts to be factual, and that's not good theology.
Well, in your study of literature, which authors in particular did you study, and who were you drawn to most?
Well, at Oxford we had to study the whole course of English literature, but I did my doctoral thesis on Tennyson. Tennyson's language and poetic style, and that in itself was revealing because I didn't know it at the time. Tennyson was an epileptic, and I was drawn to imagery in his poetry, and I'm also an epileptic.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yes.
I did not know Tennyson was an epileptic.
Yes.
Was it diagnosed? Was he known to be?
It was, the whole family had suffered from this, and one of his brothers was in an institution.
Now, at the time you were studying Tennyson's verse, were you a diagnosed epileptic?
No.
But you had spells, I take it.
I had very bad symptoms of absolute terror, or times when you're just completely out of things. You dissociate. You would set off to go to one place and find yourself in quite a different place with no notion of how you got there. And I thought I was going mad, and it wasn't diagnosed until quite a few years after that.
So did you have these periods in the convent as well as while you were studying literature?
It got worse. The kind of epilepsy I have comes from a brain injury. Birth injury, they think, almost certainly, but it becomes activated in late adolescence. So I was having fainting spells, which the nuns diagnosed as weakness of will and emotional display. And later, when I saw a doctor, it was neurosis, and I was sent to a psychiatrist. But in fact, what it was is a physical damage, and the more seizures you have, the worse the original damage becomes. So I was very lucky eventually to get to a doctor who was able to diagnose me.
That's very interesting how in each setting it was explained according to the vocabulary of that setting. So it was weakness of will in the religious setting, and it was neurosis in the, I guess, literary psychological setting. You are extraordinarily prolific. You have written 20 books. I know earlier you had said, well, you've had a long time to do it, but that's not so. 20 books, some shorter than others, it's true. But this level of productivity in writing, it makes me wonder if there is something actually spiritual or revelatory about the writing process itself for you.
Very much so, because this, especially the study and research I do for my books, gives me what I hoped the meditation in the convent was going to give me. When I'm immersed in these sacred texts, I will get moments or milliseconds of absolute wonder or awe. And so the research I'm doing is a quest that feeds my own spirituality. I spend hours at it every day. Silence is extremely important. In fact, when I'm not on tour like this, I live quite a monastic life. I live in silence, I live alone, I've never married. And I spend my days writing, thinking, and talking about God and spirituality. It's also changed my personality, been transformative, this study, because when you are studying people like the Prophet Muhammad or Buddha, you can't judge these people from the position of post-enlightenment rationality. You have, in a scholarly way, to reproduce the environment in which these religious developments occurred and not leave them until you can imagine that in a similar set of circumstances, you would have felt the same. You have to put clever, Oxford-educated Karen on the back burner and enter into the mind of someone like the Prophet Muhammad, who lived in the hell